As moderator, I might just take the privilege of starting. Letitia, one of the things you talked about, which has always fascinated me, is about the physicality of performance and the musician's relationship to the instrument. And it's a very personal relationship. You get to know your instrument very well. It has your blood and sweat and saliva in it, etc.
No saliva.
No saliva in yours, but George is a trombone player.
Oh yes, plenty of saliva there.
Yeah, plenty of saliva there. So the question is, and it reminded me of the things that Joel Ryan used to say at Stein, that there was no point making an instrument that's easy to play, a bit like the web that you mentioned, that you want, part of the art of performance is working with the non-linearity of the instrument and the unexpected parts of the instrument, what you were talking about, the edge. I'm just wondering if the panel, anybody on the panel, particularly you as a performer, could comment on that and the aspect of AI which is making things easy, which seems counterintuitive to what we appreciate effort. Effort makes things difficult, that things are difficult, but AI is making things easy, which would seem to me to be, making it less valuable. Anybody?
I just want to say, I think that AI, I may be wrong, because I'm not a thinker, but I think that you make it to make things easy if that's what you want. It's a bit like what George was saying. I mean, it's just doing what it can be anything. You can make things very complicated with AI. You could really mess things up if we were willing to. You could really kind of like have it do more difficult. So I think the problem is that probably, I don't know, panels have different ideas, but I think that it's just we want it to make it easy. And then we get totally bored. And then we say, oh, it's made it easy. Well, you're the one who made it, So that's my...
I might comment on the easiness of things, or the skill. The requirement for skill has been moved, in a sense, to being able to use code and download the models. But then with applications like Suno or Udio, it's very easy to get started. You type in a prompt. But even there, designing the prompt requires you to get to know the system, in a sense. And if you want to become much more creative with it, you start to explore, other characters, putting in emojis, things that the developers of the system wouldn't have ever thought about controlling. So it's a different kind of skill, and you need to get to know the model and find its points of which interesting things happen.
Yeah, I agree that things which are easy to do have no value. Again, I think that without AI, it's already the case. Let's try to show. So we don't need AI to make bad music. We are quite good at that already. But there is a musician I heard recently say something quite interesting. He said maybe in the future the great musicians will be the journalists, because they know how to talk about music or to write more precisely. And why not, after all? So I don't know if it's true. I don't know, but also I don't know how long will this prompt-based generative AI will last. I have the impression that people doing currently AI are working on totally different models, more grounded. So maybe we are just focusing on the wrong thing. I don't know.
Does this work? It does work. Wow. I think there's something interesting about that ease, that it's actually the outcome of almost a modernist prophecy that you find in the early avant-garde in the 20th century. There's a book that speaks about this, I forgot the title. How since the ready-made Duchamp and the idea that everything is art, there has been a pulsion to facilitate art production. So in a way, this is not really a turning point, but the kind of outcome of how art was developing since the early 20th century, which I think is quite an interesting idea. Yeah.
Beg your pardon? I don't have any other questions, but I thought there's one in the audience there, and I think I should hand over to you because you said you had questions.
Well, maybe let's hear the questions from
Sure,
we only got a few
question in
minutes.
the audience
We've got
there.
about 10 minutes.
Hi, thank you for everyone for the presentations. I have a question for George. So you move from subject to agency, and I was just thinking about collaboration, and when we collaborate, there's a choice. And I was just thinking about choice in terms of AI, and do you foresee a time where AI will choose to collaborate with us, or am I thinking about it in sort of too much of a human term?
Well, not really, no. But let me give you a sort of a schema, a quick schema. What did I learn from making AI, living with creative machines, as I called it? I figured out something about improvisation, and a lot of the cliches about improvisation weren't working for me anymore. And so over the years, I realized that I could boil it all down to kind of 5 conditions. And time is, by the way, is not one of them. It's not, the cliche of spontaneity is one of the biggest ones. But first of all, we're swimming around in a sea of indeterminacy, but not indeterminacy like Cage, like indeterminacy versus improvisation. There's no moral imperative. It's just that's how we live. We don't know what's going to happen. The second thing is agency, and that's very important you talk about that, because agency could be thought of in several senses: the capacity to act, or if you're a Latourian, the capacity to make a difference. And so the difference between, let's say, an improvisation, if you're playing with Jerry Allen, and if you're playing Earl Brown's Summer 1952, is you have indeterminacy, certainly, but you may not have agency, because how do you know that you're making a difference? So similar, and those are 2. So indeterminacy, agency. The last 3 are analysis of conditions, which in the Brown you don't need to do, because what's the payoff for doing that? Or because if you're playing with Merce Cunningham, and I played at a lot of those events, they only want you to even look at the dancers. They want you to just create without it. And they've been doing that since 1946. So it's clearly that the idea of taking away that kind of analysis was the point of it, so that people could make their own judgments, which is number 4, thinking about what the consequences of the analysis was. And the last one was choice. And the choice thing about it, choice is the problematic one, because, and you talk about choice, is very interesting, because choice doesn't seem to have a rational basis. The chain of causality fails, because we can say, we're going to do this because, well, we can't, there's no causal basis for it. We can't trace that chain. Or I did this because. Similarly, there's no causal chain. So choice is like the collapse of the wave function. So any sort of, you're either on one side or the other. So with that, what that means in terms of your question is that I'm used to systems in which we collaborate all the time. And collaboration, but it's the difference between making music, which we're hearing about a lot. Like the tool that you talked about was called Boomy, what was it called? Where you can hit a button and you can, quote, make music. And making music together, which seems to me to imply a collaboration, exchange of narratives. But maybe are the Udio people collaborating? The people that make it, are they consider themselves to be collaborating with it? I don't really know. But I mean, that was interested me, because to go a little bit further, Paul Hirsch, there's an interesting essay from sociologists of music, from sociologists of art from I think it was the 1970s, where he said that there was so much product out there that success was stochastic, and that was in the 1970s. So we're talking about 10 billion songs. That's super stochastic. So where does agency go at that point? So that's my partial response to what you're saying.
Thank you.
Question over here.
I'm quite sympathetic to the thought of the creation of a musical environment in the future where appropriation is just as important, if not more important, than any kind of objective quality measure. The idea being that in most, if not all, other human cultures of history, music was made by everybody. It was not something that was made by a class of people called professional musicians. And only passively consumed by everyone else. And now, coming from the tradition of Western classical music, of course, there's also this idea that compositions were not written to be things with which performers exhibited themselves to publics, but rather to be mediums of communication between the composers and the musical audience, which was not listeners, but rather players. It would be ridiculous in Beethoven's time to perform a sonata. Nobody did that. A sonata was more...
You're kidding, right? Of course they did that.
Well...
You're kidding, right? I mean, just look at some of the programs. I mean, Beethoven would perform... Look, he wrote letters to people. Have you read any of his letters? I mean,
I would say I've read most of them.
Yeah, well, good. Did you read the one where he talked about his septet?
Yes, but I'm talking about sonatas.
Well,
piano sonatas.
But they did them. Okay, we won't argue about that. But there's plenty of evidence to contraindicate what you're saying.
So my question would be, how do you see the possibilities of AI to allow people to become players, not performers, but players? Because the AI tools you've been talking about that are sort of mass marketed are about pressing a button and generating a piece of music and not being real time creating this piece of music or playing it.
I think that's a very interesting question, and I think there are plenty of ways that one can become a player, so to speak, at that. It's a new kind of appropriation, that you have a system generate a bunch of stuff. That's the material from which you're going to draw to create a composition, a larger composition. You don't see that happening, though, in the most case with Uno and Suno. I keep asking on these Discords, who's doing interesting work with Udio and Suno? Who's making comments on our condition, as a human species? It seems like most people are there living out fantasy of being a rock star and putting out albums of music that they like to listen to. But I would suggest we all become familiar with the economics of music, and a really good text that's been influential for me is Jacques Attali's Noise, published in 1977, where it's a thin text, but it's very dense with ideas. He talks about music going through 4 different stages. One is sacrifice. It's a simulacrum of sacrifice. It serves a religious purpose. It's not for money. And then it goes into the representation stage, where you have publishing and performances. Performances become the spectacle. And then it goes to the repetition stage, which is the recording, and the object of ownership is not the music, but the album. And then you reach a crisis of proliferation, where the value of that music decreases to 0, such that you enter the next stage, which is composing. Music becomes only valuable to the one doing it. Music is created for oneself. And it's a very enlightening text that is more present today, I believe, than when he wrote it in 1977. So very forward-looking. Any thoughts on that from the panel?
Yeah, and again, I will go back to more like commercial arguments. Sorry, I'm the bad guy here, but there is something which I think is interesting to study, is this notion of cover. So you have a song, you compose a song, and then you record the song, and then the cover is that the song is so good or so interesting that other people are going to make other versions of the song, right? Cover. And it's very interesting to study covers, I have a paper on that, but it's very interesting to see that there is a clear, very big bump in the activity of covers around the 60s, 70s, 80s. And today there is very little covers, including for the very, very well-known songs. They are not covered. And so I would be very surprised when AI generates a song that is covered. This has not happened. And I think there is a direct correlation between the number of covers of a song. I'm talking about the song, not the recording, the publishing side, the song in its essence, let's say, right? There is, I think, a direct correlation between the number of times the song is covered and its, let's say, intrinsic quality. Of course, you can. This can be discussed, but currently, the songs, everything that's generated is like at the audio level, as we know, but it's not at the song level, at the publishing level. So there is no cover because it's just like a flow of stuff. And so I would not dismiss. Again, I don't know. Maybe next week something will come up, and everything we say will be obsolete. But we are. I mean, AI currently is doing only the production side of music. It's not doing the composition. There is nothing in AI doing anything interesting in composition. I'm talking about composition of songwriting, right? Not mainstream songs. Why not? I have. How much time do you have? There are. One reason is because we don't have the right to do it, because it's forbidden in Europe to build a database of lead sheets, for instance. It's forbidden. It's a database of songs. If I want a database with the Beatles, the Bee Gees, the Coltrane, whatever, I cannot. I don't have the right? Especially with the new AI Act, I'm bringing this for you so that you can. Basically, all these things are forbidden. In Europe, in the States, it's like so-so, we don't know, and in Japan, you can do what you want, and there is this thing called internet, so you just go to a country where you can do it, right? So, but that's the main reason, is that there is no such database. We have a database of all the songs in audio form, like Spotify or Udio has very probably been trained on all this. There is no database of songs at the publishing level. So that's one reason, but there are many others.
I mean, maybe I didn't get that. I mean, like you're saying we need a database of songs to create new stuff? Yes. Well, what happened? Well, I don't know. I mean, like, it seems to me that we've had a lot of new stuff already. So what was the database that created that? We've had a lot of very interesting stuff. This guy was just talking about Beethoven. I mean, maybe the database was the period of songs around him and the milieu and the culture that produced that. And the interesting thing about the septet was people told him that, I love this septet. You ought to write more music like that. And he said, Mozart wrote that. So Mozart was in the database too. But now we're saying that, is that what you mean? That somehow there's a sort of a set of a community or a background of songs that we need to create out of, which indicates that there's something kind of communal about music, which is sort of contraindicated by sitting at your computer and doing it all by yourself?
No. I was talking about AI. I don't think we need AI. I mean, we don't need anything. We basically we can do music without AI. It's great. I was talking about the current limitations of AI used for generating music, and the limitation in composition are very clearly related to the lack of that database for training. But humans don't need anything. Well,
I guess that's why it's artificial intelligence.
Quickly related to the cover songs, my research group, we've toyed with the idea of creating an AI music cover band. So you heard it first. Covering only the best in AI-generated music.
And going back to the database, we had this discussion with Alex Reisner from The Atlantic, ChatGPT and so on. It's been trained on something I think is called Books3 database, that is full of stuff that shouldn't be there. And now retroactively doing that today would not be possible, because it's actually not fully legal. Depending on I think the law is different in Europe and the US and so on, but that's still something that is to be defined, let's put it that way. So I think companies now are a bit more careful with what they use to train and so on. Yeah.
One last thing. So I guess we've gotten to the last stage of my talk, if I've been to see this, where we're mainly talking about tools and how to use them. We're not talking about subjects. We're not talking about objects. We're talking about objects, because objects and tools are very related. We're talking about how to instrumentalize the technology. And it was very interesting because for me, if I look at Attali's 4 stages, I see the stage that we've been talking about as the ultimate form of repetition. I don't see any composition in what's going on there. So, and of course, as you know, Attali wrote a sequel to Paris, which was a total failure. I mean, all that incredible prescient stuff that he said, you know, it all disappeared in the sequel, which was much longer and much less interesting. But so at a certain point, I mean, I don't know, maybe that's where we are with it, is that if we are more concerned about, at this point, instrumentalizing the technology, usually what happens is the technology turns around and instrumentalizes us. And that's the big danger that I see in this conversation as I've heard it so far.
Thank you, George. And I think we'll make those the concluding remarks of the session, because we're 5 minutes late for the next break. And so we have a break now until 4 o'clock, and then there'll be the final session of the day. So I'd like to thank all of the panel members, please. Thank you.